Excuse me. Um, Today is the vlog for June 6th, and my nose just started. Oh, my nose just started being very, very itchy and uncomfortable, and I sneezed, and right as I hit the button to start the video, I sneezed, of course. I talked a lot yesterday. Let's try and keep this one short because I'm tired. I went for a walk down the preserve, and I went up and down and up and down and up and down 3 times. The whole walk took just a little under 2 hours, which is actually a lot more time than I tend to spend in the preserve. Although part of the reason it took so long is that I paused a few times to record notes. You know, if you had asked me a month ago what I thought of D&D, I would have told you it was a waste of time. But I've spent all day writing notes for a campaign setting I've just made up. I call it Dynostria, I think is how I settled on the pronunciation. Dynostria. Dynostria. And it starts simply enough. The very first thing that I would tell any players is the last true dragon is dead. It's compelling, right? I want to figure out what does that mean? What if there aren't any dragons? It's not really Dungeons and Dragons, is it? It's just dungeons at that point, and that's sort of depressing unless you're a dominatrix or something. But anyway, kids, don't ask your parents what that means. I wanted something that was a little bit different. That's not to say that there aren't things that resemble dragons in this setting. There are. Specifically, the Dragonborn player race is, of course, quite popular by all available metrics I've seen. And as such, I wanted them to have a pretty special place. So the idea is that there was a war between 2 types of dragons that are familiar to anybody who plays D&D, the chromatic dragons and the metallic dragons. The metallic dragons are classically good dragons that like to help young mortals, what they consider young races. Chromatic dragons are typically evil. They are the monsters that St. George would go and slay, and they see mortals as, at best, playthings and, at worst, food. Although some of them would only ever see them as food. Anyway, I wanted to play with this idea. So, the idea is that there was a war between the 2 types of dragons. And while metallic dragons are classically portrayed as good and well-meaning, I wanted to twist that a little bit. So I came up with the idea of an empire that these dragons had been instrumental in setting up. They thought that they could rule the lesser races to lead them to prosperity and peace between each other, but people are going to do what they want to do, and especially with the meddling of the chromatic dragons on the other side, proxy wars were fought between the 2 sides, and a Cold War sort of existed for a long period of time with random areas of warfare, open warfare erupting occasionally. But what happened was the metallic dragons created a device with the help of lesser races that sterilized all of the chromatic dragons. The thought was that this act would lead the chromatic dragons into depression, where they would be more malleable and less likely to cause trouble, and eventually give the metallic good dragons, sole control over the planet. Now, a lot of you are thinking that that's not good. That's not a nice thing to do. explicitly committing genocide against all the unborn children of an entire species. That's not good, but you can see how it's very much the sort of dilemma that must have approached the people who decided to drop the atomic bomb. Wipe out a portion of a species, unfortunately the not alive portion, in order to save a greater number of people of other species. That's what these metallic dragons were thinking. And they saw the sacrifice of a group that had been their mortal enemies for centuries or millennia as the correct thing to do. And for those of us who would just be, people in this world, these giant monsters, it would probably seem like a pretty okay deal to have these evil monsters eventually wiped off the face of the planet. Well, it doesn't go very well for the metallic dragons. Instead of sinking into despair, what happens is the chromatic dragons go crazy with rage and grief. They drive through this metallic dragon empire, laying waste to every dragon, every metallic dragon they see, and any mortals that happen to join on the side of the metallic dragons. It's a bloodbath, and in many people's eyes is entirely justified. At the end of this fighting, only a fourth of the metallic dragons that once lived are still alive, and then the chromatic dragons get their hands on the same magical device that sterilized them, and they sterilize the metallic dragons in turn. The surviving metallic dragons sort of fade into obscurity to live out their existences however they like, which leaves the chromatic dragons with a dilemma. What do they do with the rest of their existence? Well, the oldest and most powerful simply start to watch all of their kin fade away. The younger dragons watch, the eldest fall one by one. And so only the truly powerful dragons are left. And 5 of these creatures, known as the 5 great worms, gather together, and one of them sort of says, look, we have nothing left. All of our treasure means nothing because we can't take it with us, and we can't pass any of our territory down to our children. Everything we've done up to this point basically doesn't matter anymore. What can we do to give our lives meaning? Well, we can try and do the right thing that the metallic dragons did try to do, only we'll do it correctly. We won't try and set ourselves up as the absolute rulers of the world. We will give that ability to the lesser races, and that will be our legacy. Now, I can see some people, if they come by this and read this, going, this flies in the face of everything these dragons have represented throughout Dungeons & Dragons. They're the bad guys. They are always the evil dragons. They're the bosses that you're trying to beat. They have the treasure that you want as an adventurer. That's their purpose. Well, what purpose is that if they no longer exist? If they know they're going extinct, what would they do? Would they try and destroy the world out of spite? They've been living there for an awful long time. I don't know how spiteful they might be, but I think especially for these last 5 great worms that have survived all of this, they're looking for a means to sort of, they want immortality. I mean, they're basically very greedy because they're dragons, and they want something, but that immortality, they realize, can only be a legacy. It can only be what they hand down to whoever they see fit, and in this case, it's going to be lesser races. Now, as it turns out, the dragons have surviving relatives. Not true dragons, but the dragonborn race that was created when dragons shifted and interbred with mortal races for centuries. They're still around. They have admittedly short lifespans. They actually have shorter lifespans than human beings. but the dragons see these as their true survivors, and they want these dragonborn to have a world where they can feel safe, and they want those dragonborn to succeed, because no matter how evil you are, there is a biological drive to try and see your children succeed. And when the real children of all these dragons have completely disappeared, what do you have left? Well, you have these dragonborn who carry your genetics in them. So I would imagine that they would have some sort of bond with those beings. So the campaign starts with the death of the last true dragon, which is a white dragon who was not as powerful as his kin, but is very good at surviving and staying out of the line of fire, as it were. And when that dragon passes away, it gives a warning saying, there's something else out there that no dragon has ever told a mortal, and I'm going to say what it is with my dying breath. You'll have to do something in order to survive what's coming next. But I don't want to spoil everything. Don't want to spoil the surprise for any adventurers that might want to take part in this. I don't know if I actually want to run a campaign. I think I'm more likely to actually write some fiction using all of these ideas, which is my specialty. When it comes to world building, I like using prose a lot more than I like trying to make people fight goblins and living skeletons and crap like that. But we'll see. Maybe a couple of my friends will see this vlog and be like, I want to play that game. That sounds really cool. And it's much more, high fantasy D&D, so you could bring whatever character you wanted into the scheme of things. And it wouldn't be like trying to adapt the Dai-Gaia universe to Dungeons and Dragons. That sounds like a nightmare. But we'll see. We'll see. And I've gone over 10 minutes again. All right, time to call it quits and probably crawl into bed pretty quick here. So I've been Eric Spornitz, and tomorrow will be better.